All right, hello everyone. Welcome back to Lecture 2 for our course. Thank you so much for listening in today, or for those of you who are going to listen online later, thank you for your time. Today, basically what we're going to do is just go a step deeper from what we did last week. We're going to do some more thorough data exploration. We're going to dive deeper into a data set. And then, instead of building a story, we're going to build a dashboard where we can have multiple sheets that interact with one another, and so that people can really get a sense of multiple aspects of a data set. So again, along the way, for those of you who are listening in, please feel free to type questions into the chat or the Q&A box, and I'll either get to those along the way or get to those at the end of our time today. And hopefully we'll be able to actually publish to the web this time. Sorry about that from last week. But again, thank you to those of you who have completed the assignment. I really appreciate all the hard work you've done. We've had some great work so far. And for those of you who haven't had a chance yet to finish up your assignments, please go ahead and continue to finish those up. And when you're done with them, just toss the link or post the link on our Reddit page. I'll be happy to get to those. The point of this course is really for you to grow and understand and use and learn Tableau. So if that means you work at a slower pace, or if you have an extra busy week at work, that's totally fine. Just go ahead and submit your assignments as you complete them. So let's go ahead and dive into Tableau today. First, we're going to take a look at the data set that we're working with. So let's just see if we can get this on the screen. There we go. Okay. So today, we're going to be working with a data set that's about how people commute to work. And this data set is about just commuting in the United States. Sorry for those of you who are international. I'm hoping to do one that's focused somewhere else in the world next week for our data that we go through in class. So for this week, this is the data set that we have. As you can see, we have a couple of different years. We have the years 2007 through 2011. And we have a couple of different measures for each of our states in each year. So as you can see here, the data that we have right now is structured exactly as Tableau will want it, where each row represents one state in 1 year. If we look down, we'll have another row for Alabama in 2008 for all of the columns, and similarly for the other years and the other states. So what we're going to want to do now is actually bring this into Tableau. So last week I used Tableau Desktop. This week I'm going to use Tableau Public. So let's just go ahead and open up Tableau Public. All right, here it is. So now remember that when we open up Tableau Public, we have all the workbooks that I've been working on, and we have this button over here that's Connect to Data. So we're going to connect to data. Oh, sorry guys, this is actually Tableau Desktop. What I wanted was Tableau Public. Give me a second to open that up. There we go, that looks better. Okay, so this is the Tableau Public start page. So basically you still have the workbooks that you've been working on recently, and you have some of the resources here. So now I'm going to open my data. And today, our data is in an Excel file. So let's go ahead and select Microsoft Excel. I'm going to navigate to where I know my data is on my computer, and then we'll open it up. So now last week, we used data that was in a CSV file, which Tableau will interpret as a text file. Today, our data is in an Excel file. So when you open up an Excel file in Tableau, what it will do is it'll say, okay, which sheet is your data set in? Is it in D1, data, or transport? And I can look back at my data, and I can double check that. So what it's referring to is these tabs along the bottom down here. Now, I know that my data, the stuff that I want to bring to Tableau, is under the tab Data. So I can just drag that sheet into the Visual Data window. And then I can go ahead and look and see, okay, did Tableau interpret my data correctly? We have all my states, my years, and then we have all of our other measures. And yeah, this looks exactly as how I want it. So I can go ahead and go to my worksheet. so I can start answering and asking and exploring some of the questions that I might have. So similarly to last week, we get a blank canvas. We have the power now to ask and answer some of the questions that we may have. So let's say I start out, and my first question is, what states do I have in my data set? I can double click on state, and Tableau will give me a map. And just a quick reminder from last week, Tableau categorizes our fields into dimensions and measures. Measures are things we want to do math on. Dimensions are things we won't want to do math on. Dimensions are things that we want to categorize the data by and slice and dice the data by. Measures, we won't want to do that. Measures will want to sum, average, minimum, maximum, those types of things. So now that we've brought our data into Tableau and we've seen, okay, it looks like we have data for all of the states. Let's say I want to then ask the question, okay, how about which state has the most people that commute by bike, motorbike, taxi, or other? Well, what I can do is I can drag this measure onto color. What we have now is we have a filled map where each of the states is colored according to its bike, motorbike, taxi, and other percentage. So as we look at just the color on the map, it looks like Alaska has the most people that are commuting in that mode. But let's say I want to see something slightly different. A lot of people nowadays are concerned with people carpooling to work or taking other modes of transportation to reduce their carbon footprint. So what if I want to see, how about which state has the highest single occupant vehicle? So the one that needs to work on cutting down the single occupant vehicles the most. I can just drag single occupant vehicle under my measures and just replace that. Let's just put that on color. What that'll do is it'll now color my map according to this single occupant vehicle instead of bike, motorbike, taxi, and other. So now we can do some data exploration. It looks like for the most part, my map is really, really green. I can't really tell which one has more or which one has less because they all look like they're roughly on a similar color scale. But then I can hover over a state and see, okay, it says that Florida has 398% of people that are commuting by single occupant vehicles. Now, I'm a data expert on this particular data set, and I know right away that doesn't intuitively make sense because I know that I can't have more than 100% of people commuting by single occupant vehicles. So now I have to do a little bit more data exploration and figure out why I'm getting such a high number for this single occupant vehicle rate, percent for my states. Well, what Tableau has done is it's given us the single occupant vehicle value for all my states in all my years. So this is the value for Alaska summed up from 2007 to 2011, which isn't what we want. We don't want to give our readers these numbers and tell them that Nevada had 390% of people commuting this way. It just doesn't make sense. So to solve that problem, we can use a quick filter. We talked briefly about this last week. We're going to go into it a little bit more this week. But we can take year from under our dimensions and filter so that we can only see 1 year at a time. So let's just drag year onto filters. And now we're prompted to have this slider because year is currently set as continuous. That means we're not looking at year as 5 discrete buckets. We're looking at it as this range of values from 2007 to 2011. Now, we don't have data for in between the years. So we actually do want to group and categorize the years as their buckets. So we want it to be discrete. So I'm going to have to change that before I can filter. So I can hit cancel, and let's change this year to being discrete. I can right click on this pill, or I can select the drop down caret next to the year pill underneath our dimensions, and let's convert this to discrete. So now what we'll have instead is 5 buckets. So 2007 will be a bucket, 2008 will be a bucket, and so on, instead of having this continuous scale of years. So let's drag year onto filters now. So this is more what we want. We want to be able to see 1 year at a time instead of selecting multiple years. So let's just go ahead and start out with 2007. Maybe I'm really concerned with what this was exactly in 2007 instead of, 2008, 2009. So I hit apply. So now if we hover over a state, we're getting numbers that make a whole lot more sense. Texas, roughly 80% of the people are commuting by single occupant vehicles. Florida, back to around 80%. And now, really quickly, my eye is drawn to New York. New York has significantly lower amounts of, or less amounts of people that are commuting by single occupant vehicles. In fact, it's roughly a little over half that are doing that, as opposed to the 80 or so % for some of the other states. But now let's say I want to click to the next year. I want to see what it's like in 2008. So what I really want to show is a quick filter. I want the people that are viewing my visualization to be able to have the power to see different years. So I can create a quick filter by right-clicking on this pill right here under my filters and saying Show Quick Filter. So what Tableau has automatically done is given me a multi-select quick filter per year. But we already talked about how we only ever want to see 1 year at a time. So I'm going to want to change the type of this filter. And this is pretty common because sometimes there will be data sets where it doesn't make sense to view 2 things at once, or where you have conflicting information or something along those lines, where you're going to want to have the control to change the filter and make it a single value. So we can either change it to a single value radio button filter, and it's not extremely clear, but these numbers are changing. Let's see, Kansas, 81.5% in 2011, 2010. Kansas, 82.13%. So they aren't changing a whole lot, but they are pulling the correct value for those years. And something that I really like to do when I'm using a year quick filter is have it set so that it's a slider. That way, it encourages the reader to click through and see the change over time. But then, the default with our quick filters in Tableau, it defaults to all. And we talked about multiple times that we don't want our reader to ever be able to see all of the values at once. Now, this is something that's really easy to change. We can just remove all from our quick filter by selecting the drop-down caret on our year filter, saying Customize, and unchecking Show All. Now, we have our quick filter working exactly as we want it to. Are there any questions so far along the way about this? All right, no questions so far, so I'll keep going. Oh, one question. We have a question about the new mapping in Tableau. So with Tableau 8.2, we have a new mapping, new and better mapping. And whenever you open Tableau 8.2, it will default to that. And I'll send you some more information about that. All right, so let's move on. Let's say that now I want to look at maybe a different type of commuting mode. I want to look at maybe multiple occupant vehicles instead of single occupant vehicles. So I could drag multiple occupant vehicles to color and change the view again. But let's say I want to give my reader the choice and the option to look at these different commuting modes. I want them to be able to say, okay, maybe I walk to work. I want to see what the percentage of walking is in my state. I want to see what it is across the U.S. Well, changing the measures and dragging them to color isn't something that our end user is going to be able to do when we publish this to the web. So we're going to have to actually use something called a parameter. Now, parameters in Tableau are really, really powerful. They basically let us change what we're looking at on our view according to a control. So they're kind of similar to quick filters, except for the fact that we're completely controlling what the parameter shows. So it'll make more sense when I dive into this and I show you an example. So let's create a parameter. So we're going to call this parameter commuting modes. And we're going to make this an integer, and it's going to be a list. Now, let me explain this a little bit more. So with the parameter, what we really want is to be able to say, okay, when my parameter is set to 1, I want you to show bike, motorbike, taxi, and other. When my parameter is set to 2, I want you to show multiple occupant vehicles. When it's set to 3, I want you to show single occupant vehicles. And so it'll give us basically the power to say, click through the different measures that we have in our data set. So let's just work on that. So 1, when my parameter's value is 1, I want it to display bike, motorbike, taxi, other. When my value is 2, I want my parameter to show multiple occupant vehicle. When my parameter is 3, I want it to show single occupant vehicle. When my parameter is 4, I want it to show transit. When my parameter is 5, I'd like it to show walking. And when my parameter is 6, I'd like to show worked at home. So now what we have is this parameter where we have these 6 built-in options. But what we really want to do is have some way where we can use whatever the parameter is set at to control the view, to control what we're looking at, basically to control the coloring of the states. So let's just first go ahead and show this parameter control. The parameters will remain constant throughout your entire workbook. So if you have a parameter called commuting modes, if we pull it up in this particular sheet, it'll be the same as if we pull it up in another sheet. And similarly, if we change it, like if we have this parameter here and we have it set as transit, if we have it on a dashboard, it will also be set as transit, which can come in handy when we are going to end up using this for our end product. So to show the parameter so that we can control and see what the parameter is set at, we're going to right-click on the parameter on the left sidebar and say Show Parameter Control. So now we know that our parameter is set on single occupant vehicle or transit or walking. But what we really want is we want to be able to control what our map is colored by. To do that, we're going to create something called the calculated field. And the calculated field is basically going to pull the value from this parameter right here and select the correct measure that we want. So let's call this calculated field display. And this is the syntax of what we're going to do to pull the correct measure. So if we say case and then select our parameter, what this does is say, okay, I want you to, we're telling Tableau, I want you to look at what the value of the parameter is. And then when it's all of the different things, I'm going to tell you what I want to display. So when the parameter is set as 1, then display bike, motorbike, taxi, and other. When our parameter is 2, display multiple occupant vehicle. When 3, then when 3, then single occupant vehicle. When 4, then transit. When 5, then walking. When 6, then worked at home. And since I know that's all the values that I have in my parameter, I can just end this statement. So now this calculated field is how we're going to be able to color our map based on what the parameter is set as. And this is a really powerful way to display the information that you want when your data is structured the way we have it for this particular one. This idea and the parameters and picking the field using a calculated field It'll work for a lot of different ways your data is structured. Sometimes you won't need it, sometimes you will. It's kind of a case-by-case thing. So now that we have this calculated field created, and Tableau, when we create these calculated fields, will either give you a green check mark saying, yes, that's valid, or a red X saying, no, you need to fix this, or no, this is not an aggregate. And usually those are relatively straightforward on what you need to fix. But in week 4, so 2 weeks from now, we're going to go a lot deeper into calculated fields. So hold your excitement until then. We will talk more about those. Are there any questions on how we created this calculated field or why we created the calculated field? All right. So now that we have this calculated field, I can say, okay, what this does is it creates this calculated field for us. And remember, we called it display. So now, instead of coloring our map by walking, let's color our map by this display calculated field. So I'm going to drag display from my measures onto color on the marks card. So now what we have is we have this colored according to this parameter that we have over here. So our parameter is currently set as bike, motorbike, taxi, and other. But let's say I really want to look at walking. I can go to walking and it changes my view without me having to drag it from my measures onto my color on the marks card. So now it's like built-in automated process of what I had to do earlier. And this is something that the end user can actually use. So let's look at walking for a second. I actually personally walk to work. I think it's the greatest thing ever. I love it. I wouldn't want to live far enough away that I couldn't do that. And I live in Washington State. So let's look and see where, okay, in Washington State, only roughly 3.5% of people walk to work. Alaska has a lot more. They have roughly 8.5%. So now we can continue to do that data exploration of the commute modes for the 50 states. Awesome. So now what I really am going to think about is how can I set up my dashboard in a way where people are going to want to interact with it. Now, something that's very common that people do when they're creating maps on a dashboard in Tableau is they will hide Alaska and Hawaii on the map and basically make their own separate little maps for Alaska and Hawaii. And we're going to do that in just a second after we fix our tooltips. So something that I constantly am forgetting along the way that I always have to remind myself to go back and fix are the tooltips. Tooltips can be really important to give our end users some more information about what they're actually looking at. So let's go ahead and edit these tooltips before we move on. And just a refresher, to edit the tooltips, we just double click on Tooltip on the marks card. And that brings up this rich text editor window. So I'm just going to edit this tooltip so that I think it'll look like someone will want to interact with it. Almost always we'll want to remember to uncheck include command buttons. We haven't really found them being super useful in visualizations, and that's something that I constantly forget to do, but it's really easy to just go in and uncheck include command buttons. And so now when my users look at this map, they'll see Arizona and display equals this. Now, me being the data expert, I know that I can give them some more information on, what is display? What are they looking at? So I can go back into my tooltip, and instead of having display there, I can insert in the value of the parameter. And this is really awesome to be able to do this in your tooltip. So I'm just going to insert parameters. So what this will do is it will always show me in my tooltip what the parameter is set as. And since we know that whatever the parameter is set as will control what our map is colored by, this is actually what we want. So I'll select the parameter here and say, okay, let's just check out what we have now. So now we have what we want. We have the corresponding commuting mode and the percentage. But I can take this a step further and throw a % sign on the end. because I know these are percents. There we go. So now my tooltip is really clean and easy to look at. Are there any questions along the way so far? All right, I'm going to keep going. So now I'm just thinking more about this data discovery. I'm thinking more about when I look at, say, single occupant vehicles, I can't really tell the range of colors. So I can actually change the color that my map is, my filled map, by selecting this drop-down caret on my color legend and saying edit colors. And I have a lot of different colors to choose from. There are some built-in ones. There are some other ones that I have borrowed from someone. And if you want more information on that, I can absolutely provide you with more information on custom colors for here. But let's say I want to use this color scheme. So that way, when it's on the higher end, it's going to be this lime green color. And when it's on the lower end, it's going to be this light blue color. And let's just see what that looks like before we hit OK. Let's hit apply instead. All right, now my eye is drawn really quickly and clearly to the fact that New York is so much lower than my other states. So I like this at this point. So let's check OK. And let's explore and see what this looks like in other selections of a parameter. Awesome. So now, back to what I was talking about earlier, how we might want to have, let's say, a map for just the US and then have a smaller little map for Alaska and Hawaii. Well, we can absolutely do that. What I'm going to do is duplicate the current sheet that we have. So by duplicating the sheet, I have the exact view I'm looking at, and all of the corresponding quick filters and the parameter controls will go with it. It'll give me an exact copy of what I'm looking at right now. So I'm going to make 2 additional duplicate copies of this sheet so that I can have one for the US, one for Alaska, and one for Hawaii. So let's do that now. I'm going to right-click on sheet 1 down here at the bottom and say duplicate sheet. And let's duplicate the sheet again. So now what I'm going to do on each of these 3 sheets is I'm going to zoom in and select just US, Alaska, and Hawaii. So let's zoom in and do just the US for this one. Now I can set this sheet, rename this sheet to say US. I can go to my next duplicate, or my first duplicate copy, and let's just have this one be Hawaii. So we'll call that Hawaii. And then for this one, my last duplicate copy, we can go in and just say, okay, just show me Alaska, and then rename it and call it Alaska. So this will come in handy more when we're building our dashboard later on. And this idea can come in handy for a lot of other parts of the world as well for mapping. All right, so let's say I want to ask a slightly different question. Let's say I want to ask the question of which states have the highest mean commute time. To do that, I'm going to open up a new sheet. And so remember, to open up a new sheet, I can do one of 3 things. I can open up a new sheet by selecting this icon down here at the bottom. I can click that same icon up here along the top bar, or I can go Worksheet, New Worksheet. I personally like opening up a new worksheet from this icon at the bottom, so I'll just select that right there. And again, we're back to this blank canvas where we can ask and answer some new questions. So let's look at the question that I asked about the commute time, the mean commute time. So let's drag mean commute time, how about to columns? So now what we have is we have a sum of all of the commute times for all of our states in all of our years, which intuitively we know isn't exactly what we want. So we can drag state to rows. What this is done now is it's broken up the mean commute time by state. So similarly to like when we opened up that map and we colored it by, say, walking, and it summed it up for all of the years that we have in our data set, Tableau has done the same thing here. So in Alabama, over the 5 years, we have a commute time of 119.13 minutes. I'm going to add the quick filter for year again so that we are just looking at 1 year's worth of mean commute time. So again, to show that quick filter, we can right-click here, say show quick filter. Then Tableau will still default to showing us this multiple value quick filter with all as an option. I'm just really quickly going to go in and change that as we did earlier to a single value slider, and also get rid of all functions. So go to Customize and uncheck Show All Value. So now we're back to where we were on the quick filter. Awesome. But let's say I really want to see which state has the highest mean commute time. I want to see top one, which one does it take the longest time to get to work. I can sort these states according to their mean commute time by selecting this icon right here. That icon is also down here along the axis. So Tableau will cycle through 3 different types of sort. The first sort will be ascending, then descending, and then alphabetical. I tend to this is actually, in different contexts, different types of sorts will make more sense. All right, so now we had a question about what else could parameters be used for? Well, we can actually use them in this setting right now. Let's say I ask the question, what are the top 10 states that have the longest commute time, or top 5, or top 6, or top 15? And I want to give people, my reader, the control of selecting however many they want to see. If they only want to see top 5, show them the top 5. If they only want to show them the top 10, show the top 10. But just giving the end user the option to select that. So what I can do is create another parameter. So I'm just going to right-click in the data window over here and say Create Parameter. And this time a parameter is going to be slightly different than what we had last time. Let's call this parameter Top Commuting. And we want the options for this parameter to be integers, meaning whole numbers. We don't want someone to look at 2.5 top commuting states. It doesn't really make much sense in terms of the data. So now that we have the data type as integer, we want to show a range of values for this one because we want someone to be able to pick anywhere from 1 to 50 states. So I can just check the minimum as 1, I can check the maximum and set it as 50, and I want to give my reader the option to really drill down and see the exact number of states that they'd like. So that's why I checked my step size as 1. So let's say, okay. So now the way that we're going to incorporate this parameter into the view that we're currently looking at is we have to think intuitively on what we're doing. We're filtering the number of states we want to see in this. So we actually want to filter by state. So I'm going to drag state from my dimensions onto the filter shelf. So currently we have all of our states checked on here. So we're showing all the states that we have in our data set. But what we want to do now is show the top number of states. By a field, we want to show the top. And here's where we're going to incorporate our parameter. If we select this drop-down caret and say top commuting, that's the parameter that we had created just now. So what this will do is by selecting that, it will show the top, whatever the parameter is set as, by the sum of mean commute time, which is exactly what we want. So if we say, okay, now remember, our parameter value was set as 1, which is why we're only seeing 1 state here. But let's say we want to change that. We want to see 3 or 4 states. I can actually show this parameter and change the value right here. So let's right-click Top Commuting and say Show Parameter Control. And now I have the ability to control the view and to show however many of the top commuting states I'd like. Let's say I want to show the top 25 states that have the highest commute time. I can do that by changing my parameter. If I want to show all of these, I can just simply scroll all the way to the end of my parameter, and then I can see all of the different states. Similarly, I can show just 10 or however many I'd like. Let's start with 10 for now. So now looking at this view, I can ask some questions. So it looks like a lot of the places where it takes a long time to commute are on the East Coast. But then let's say I want to look at the top 15 and see, are there more East Coast places here? Oh, look, where I live has a very high commute time, at least in 2007. Let's see if it's still there in 2008. Yep, Washington still has the 15th highest commuting time in the U.S. in 2008. And it gets greater in 2009. Oh, back down in 2010. Same for 2011. So now we have this view where we can really dig deeper and really interact with and ask some more questions with our data. Now, just looking at this view, I'm seeing something that we call the Tableau blue. This is the default color for our visualizations when we create a bar chart or a line chart, things like that. It's this blue color, which isn't a bad color, but I tend to like to change the color by selecting color on the marks card and just taking something that's a little bit different. So, and just adding my own flair and my own touch to this visualization. All right, so now I've asked a slightly different question, but let's say I have one more question that I'd like to ask. Before I do that, I just remembered I have to change my tooltip. I always forget about this. So let's just double click on Tooltip and let's edit this tooltip again. Let's look at the state, have that be larger, put that in the middle maybe, commute time, perfect. Or I can create a sentence. I can say, the mean time for the state is that. So all I'm doing here is I'm just using what I have in my tooltip already to make my sentence look a little bit more colloquial and conversational, like someone actually wrote it. I'll uncheck that include command buttons again and say OK. So now if we look, we have this white space up here. So let's go back into our tooltip and see what that is. Oh, it's because I left this extra space here. I can just delete that. And now let's go back and check and see what our tooltip looks like. The mean commute time for New Hampshire is roughly 25 minutes. Okay, it would be really awesome if this said minutes after it. I can just go into my tooltip and add minutes in and say OK. Awesome. So now this tooltip looks really clean and it looks as I'd hope. So now I can rename my sheet by double clicking on sheet 4 down here and say total commute time by year. And now let's say we want to ask another slightly different question. I'm going to open up a new sheet to do this. Any questions so far along the way about types of fields, parameters, things that we've done in that way? All right, we have a question about displaying things in the tooltip. So if we go back to our previous view, if we look, we see that our minutes, we have 3 decimal points after our whole number. That's super customizable in Tableau. So if we go over to commute time, so that's actually what we're displaying. If we right-click on commute time under Measures and go to Default Properties, Number Format, this is where you can control if something is a currency, if something has 2 decimal points or 3 or 4 or 5, if there's a comma separator for thousands, things like that. So let's go to Number Custom. This is where we'll be able to customize exactly what we want our mean commute time to look like. So when we hovered over it, the automatic had 3 decimal points for this. But let's say we only like there to be 2. We can say 2 here. And how about well, thousands won't really matter because at this point we know that our highest is roughly around 30. So thousands won't come into play for this particular data set. All right, so now we have 2 decimal places set, say OK. And now let's hover over one of these bars and see if that change was reflected. Yep, there we go. I can go back and I can set that to be 1 decimal place, or I can set it to have 0 or 5. It all depends on what you'd like. All right, so now let's ask a slightly different question. I'm going to go back to that sheet 5 that I had created, this new sheet here, and let's look at and see the question of how about in one state in 1 year, what's the distribution of the commuting modes? So to do that, to ask that question, we're going to do something that's slightly more clever in Tableau. So what we're going to do is use measure names and measure values. Measure names and measure values are really powerful things in Tableau. So let's just start exploring these and I'll explain them along the way. So let's drag measure names to columns and measure values to rows. So what Tableau has done now is measure names is basically all of the names of my measures. Yeah, it makes sense like that. And measure values are the values of my measures. So what Tableau has done is it's taken all the different measures that I have, the bike, motorbike, taxi, commute time, display, number of records, and just said, okay, sure, you want a bar chart that has all of your different measures as a bar. Well, I know looking at this view, this could be kind of confusing for someone that's coming to look at it, one of my viewers, because it doesn't really make much sense to compare a number of records to things like the percent of single occupant vehicles for a state in a year. So I super easily can just drag off number of records from under my measure value shelf. And I can do the same with my display. Because if I leave my display in here, it will double count whatever my parameter is set as, because right now my display looks like it's set as work at home. So it's somewhat redundant to keep it in there. So I can just drag off display. And I'm going to also drag off commute time, because we really want to compare these percentages for each of my commute types. And then I can continue to explore this data. So I want to look at it with my bars being horizontal instead of vertical. And let's say I want to change the color again, maybe make it a lighter gray. And then going even further, how about if I wanted to label each of these bars so it was really quick and easy for me to see what the value of the percent was? All I have to do is take measure values and drag that to label. What Tableau has done now is it's given me a label for that particular bar. And don't worry right now, all these values are, again, summed up for all the states and all the years, but we're going to use some tricky dashboard actions coming up next to make these numbers make more sense. So hold on for right now, those numbers will intuitively make more sense in just a second. But before we move on, let's say we want to make this label have a percent sign after it. All we have to do is go to where it says label on the marks card, select label, and click this little ellipsis here. This little ellipsis will take us to the editing window for what I'm displaying on my label. So I'm just going to add a percent sign after my measure values and say apply. Okay, so now these will make more sense in just a second, but I'm looking at this view right here and I'm thinking, okay, if I'm already labeling this, having this axis here is also somewhat redundant. So I can actually hide that in Tableau. If I just right-click on the axis down here and uncheck Show Header, what that does is now our axis labels are gone. And in this case, it makes a lot of sense to do that because we already have these bars labeled. And similarly, if I already have these bars labeled, do I really need to have a tooltip? No, not really. In Tableau, if you click on the tooltip and just delete all of the information in there and uncheck Include Command buttons, the tooltip won't appear. All right, so we've asked and answered some questions and we've gone through and explored some of the data, but now we really want to combine all of this information and see it in an interactive dashboard. So let's rename this sheet to be State Commute Types. And now let's go a step further and let's actually create a dashboard. So to create a dashboard, you can do one of two different things to create a dashboard. You can select this icon down here at the bottom that has the 4 squares on it, or you can go Dashboard, New Dashboard. I'm going to click this down here. So now, one of the most important things when you're creating a dashboard is to make sure you have it sized as you'd like. So to make sure that whatever your CMS is, if your CMS is limited to 700 pixels, you don't want to make your visualization any larger than that because then you'll get awkward scroll bars. So let's say I'm going to set mine as exactly, and I want exactly 800 pixels by 833. Sure, that's perfect. So now let's start bringing on these sheets. Let's start adding some things to our dashboard. Let's drag US out there to start. All right, we've got our map. And now I'm noticing something really quick on this map is that I have Canada and Mexico showing up, but I don't think that I want to show those. I think I want to hide those. So I can go Map Options, and we can set the washout of this map to 100%. That way, we aren't getting distracted by Canada and Mexico appearing. All right, so let's just keep moving. Let's add Alaska and Hawaii. And sorry, taking a step back, to add things to a dashboard, all the sheets that you've created will show up on this left panel over here. And we also have some other options of things that we can add to a dashboard, some text, a web page, things like that. So let's continue to add, how about Hawaii and Alaska? And let's say we also would like to add our commute type. And let's add this too. Now, obviously, we have a lot of cleaning up work to do right now because this just looks messy and we don't want to present this to anyone. So the first thing that I'm noticing is, again, US, Hawaii, and Alaska, it's kind of redundant to have these titles there because for the most part, people will know what US, Hawaii, and Alaska are. So I'm just going to go ahead and hide these titles. All right. So now what I'm noticing also is that Alaska still has this map right there. So I can go to Map on my map options and set that washout again. Let's do the same for Hawaii. All right. So the next thing that I'm noticing is that I am getting these weird scroll bars. If I go back to my sheet by selecting this drop-down caret and say go to Sheet, I can set, let's see, looks like this is not working currently, but on your copy of Tableau Public, there should be a menu up here that if you select it, you can change the type of view that you're looking at for your map. So you could select this and say normal, entire view, or fit width, fit height. For now, let's just pretend that mine's doing that. And let's continue to change the view that we're looking at. So what we can do is we really don't want Hawaii to be as large as Alaska. We want it to kind of float over here in the ocean and take up some of the white space that we already have in our visualization. So I can just select the sheet for Hawaii and select the drop-down caret and check floating. Now what this has done is it's floated floated Hawaii on my dashboard. And I can do the same thing with Alaska. I can select the drop-down caret and say floating. So now we have Alaska and Hawaii both floating. So let's just pretend with me for a second that we can see Hawaii in this. And let's just set that over there. I'm also going to float my legends. But first, let's add this title onto this thing so people will know what we're looking at. I can drag a text box. If I want to add some text, I'll drag text, and I get this gray box here. The gray box is controlling where I'm going to drop my text box. So if I place it up top, now I can type what I'd like my title to be. So I want my title to be Commuting Modes in the United States from 2007 through 2011. And let's just center this text. Let's make it bold. Let's make it really in people's faces on what they're looking at. All right, and I can resize these text boxes by just hovering over where an edge of a box is. And then these arrows will show up, and we can just drag that to the top. Perfect. Now we're really utilizing the full space that we have on our dashboard. And then we can go a step further and say, all right, I'd like my year filter to float over here. I don't want it to take up all of this area right here. So I can click on my year filter and select the drop-down caret and say floating again. And we can float it and place it over there. So floating basically means that you can place things on top of each other. When they're tiled, Tableau will automatically say, okay, nothing is allowed to overlap, which we don't necessarily want all the time. I'm going to float my color legend as well. And I'm going to float my parameter control. And see, it still works that when we change our parameter, it'll change the view. All that interactivity that we had is coming with it. I'm going to float this as well. All right, because of technical difficulties, I'm just going to exit out of Alaska and Hawaii. I'll show you next week how we can actually float those. So I'll come back to that next week. But for now, let's just talk some more about interactivity. So as you can see here, we have this awesome map, and we have some different controls. But what we really want to be able to do is have someone interact with it and have it be really, really interactive, obviously. So what we can do is we can actually have these parameter controls and this year filter control multiple views. So we know that this view down here is all of the mean commute time for each state in a certain year. But at this point, we don't have this year filter affecting this bar chart down here, which is something we really want. It really makes sense to have these two interact with one another, which is super easy to do. Let's just select this drop-down caret and say Apply to Worksheets, all using this data source. So now what we have is we have this quick filter affecting more than one sheet, which really provides some awesome interactivity to the end user. And then notice that these values, they got a lot smaller down here. And that's because now we're only summing all of the states for these values instead of summing all the states in all of the years. So we can click through and see how these are all changing. I really want to use some more of the room on my dashboard that I already have. So kind of similar to the viz that I made about our class, I'm going to want to have this sheet only show up when I hover on a state. This is one of my favorite tricks in Tableau. So what we're first going to want to do for this is create this or have this sheet float. So I'm just going to, again, select the drop-down caret on this sheet, say floating. So now we can resize this sheet how we'd like it. Oops. Now I don't like what I just did, so I can just click the back button. I love the back button, it's great. Let's say we want to make this a little bit smaller. Oops. Back button that again. All right. So now what we want is we want it when we hover over a state, or if we click a state, that it will show that state's breakdown in that year. So to do that, we're actually going to add a dashboard action. So a dashboard action basically controls how the different sheets interact with one another on your dashboard. So let's go ahead and create that first action. So let's go dashboard, actions, and we'll add an action. And since we want that sheet to be filtered, we want to filter out all of the other states except for whatever one we're hovering over. This is going to be a filter action. So we'll call this action state filter. And we want this action to run on hover. So when someone hovers over a state, this action it'll happen, it'll be performed. And our source sheet, so when someone interacts with the US sheet, then we want the state commute types to be filtered. And then remember on the dashboard that I made about our class that when you weren't hovering over anyone, no one showed up. You couldn't even see that there was that sheet hidden. We can do that here too. All you do is select exclude all values instead of leaving the filter or show all values. Leaving the filter would leave the most recent state you hovered over, and show all values would show all of them. So exclude all values is what we'd like for that. Let's say OK, and OK here, and let's test it out. Awesome. So now we have this being hidden when I'm not hovering over one. But then looking at this, it probably makes more sense to hide this title as well. So that way we don't have this random text floating around when I'm not hovering over a state. I can just right click on that and say hide title. So now let's look and see. Awesome. My breakdown is showing as I'd like it to. And again, this would be a lot more clean if we could hide the scroll bar. But right now, we can't change the way that this sheet is fitting the entire view. On your copy, you would select this drop-down menu up here and say Fit Entire View, and then this scroll bar would go away. So that's something we'll get more into next week. So this could be cleaned up more, but all of the interactivity is there. And let's say now that I want to, whenever I hover over a different state, I want that state to be highlighted down below so I can see, okay, New York has a very high percentage of people that are using transit to commute, but do they also have a really high commuting time as well? So to do that, I'm going to add another action. This time my action is going to be a highlight action. I want to run on hover, and I want my US sheet to still be the source, but this time I want my commute time by year to be the target. And if I say OK, and OK here, now it'll highlight. But let's say I'm hovering over something that's not showing up down here. That's kind of a poor experience for my user. So maybe I want to set my filter to be, my parameter to have all 50 states showing. But then it's still not even clear for my reader to see. So I can go back to my sheet and switch the rows and the columns, have them stacked horizontally instead of vertically by selecting that button right there. And maybe I want them to be sorted the other way. Let's go back to our dashboard and see how that looks. Now this is a much better experience. And again, we could fit this to entire view. And so now down here, we can really see where the comparisons are for the other states. And we can hide this field label for columns. And so now we have something that's very interactive and that we're really getting some cool information out of it. So we've just covered the two of the three different kinds of actions. We'll cover URL actions more next week. All right, so we're nearing the end of our time, and I'm going to show you how to publish this to the web since we didn't get to that last week. So if you go File, Save to Web As, I'm going to log into my Tableau public account, And then I'm going to save this worksheet as commuting modes. And say save. So now Tableau is taking all this interactivity that I've built in and publishing it to the web. And again, there are things that I can do to clean this up more. We'll go more into cleaning up the dashboard next week. But it's really important to remember that when you're saving to the web, that whatever view you're looking at is what will get published. So like in story points, if you're looking at the 5th view or the 3rd view or your last view on your story points when you publish it, that's what people will see when they first come to your viz. So it's really important that you control, and if you want someone to start on the first story point on your story, that you select the first story point when you're publishing to the web. But now you can see that I have all that interactivity built in, and it's on the web. So I'll toss this into the chat box. And if you'd like to, over this week, download this workbook, please feel free to do so and send it back to me and show me how you've cleaned it up. See if you can build some more interactivity into this or do something along those lines. I'd love to see what you could do with this. All right, we have ended our time. Are there any last minute questions for those of you who are still online that you'd like answered? All right, the questions that I have in here that I have not gotten to yet, please shoot me an email or actually comment on the Reddit so we can all see these questions and we can all throw around some ideas. Maybe put them on the comment stream for our lecture, and then we can talk more about them there. Awesome. So thank you so much for joining in today, everyone. I really appreciate you coming and spending the time. I will have this lecture posted later today so that you can watch it again if you'd like, and I should have the assignment posted today as well. So thank you so much for joining in, everyone, and I look forward to talking to you again next week. All right, bye.